Welcome to Ecocentric Media's Down to Earth Discussions, a podcast in which we explore different solutions to environmental issues. Today's guest is a registered dietitian by the name of Brandon Schaefer. He graduated from SUNY Buffalo State earlier this year and just recently passed the registration exam. You can find more Ecocentric stuff on Instagram, Facebook, and Twitter with the username WeAreEcocentric. You can also find us on YouTube at Ecocentric Media. Well, without further ado, let's get started. Brandon Schaefer, welcome to the podcast.
Hello everyone, I'm Brandon Schaefer, and as Jake introduced me, I am a registered dietitian. Just a brief introduction on me. I graduated earlier this year, and I just recently passed my registration exam. So I have a bit of experience in this sort of field, and one thing I do want to explain before we go any further is what exactly a registered dietitian is, because I've met a lot of patients and a lot of people who don't quite understand it, and it's not super common knowledge either. So, we'll start with this. So a nutritionist there's a nutritionist and there's a registered dietitian. Now, a nutritionist could be anybody that's got any sort of certificate or taken any sort of classes on nutrition. It's kind of a catch-all term. And there's not a specific standard on what exactly it is. And in comparison, a registered dietitian is someone who's gone through an accredited program, so anywhere from 4 to 6 years of education, 1,200 hours of internship work, whether that be in clinical sites, community sites, research settings, etc., and then they have to pass a registration exam. And the reason I want to explain this is just so people have a better understanding of what that is, because today we're going to be talking about, health and nutrition and what it has to do with the environment. And I see a lot of things from registered dietitians, but you see a lot of things from nutritionists as well. So when you're looking through these sort of materials, it's always good to distinguish between the two.
Right, and there's definitely a lot of people who think that they know everything on the internet, and just based on the fact that essential oils are so popular. We definitely need more facts and science in this field.
Yeah, and that's the big thing about RDNs or RDs is that they're required to have done some research. So, for example, I did some research on community health programs and their impact on cardiovascular risk factors. And just by becoming more comfortable with research, taking classes on them, conducting your own research, you can go in there and cherry pick the research that is more sound, is more proven using more studied methods, rather than, I found some study that someone did, and we're going to talk about that later with what you had wrote about Monsanto, things like that, being able to distinguish good research from bad. And that's something that's super important, especially on this topic that we're going to be talking about.
All right, and when the future of the world is on the table, I do want someone with experience. So I'm just going to segue right into our first topic, which is food waste. And I'll just start with a bit of a background. According to the USDA, food waste is estimated to be 30 to 40% of all food consumed. This means that we waste 133 billion pounds of food, or 380 pounds per person per year. This correlates to about $161 billion in just revenue loss. So how do you feel about food waste?
Food waste is a huge factor. Just from a clinical perspective, working in hospitals, you see it all the time, because when you come in and talk to a patient, I wasn't that hungry, I didn't eat much food. And that's just one setting. When you're at home with your family, for example, Thanksgiving, things like that, you do see a lot of food waste. So let's say, take your average food waste for a week and multiply it by millions of people. It's a really big thing. And environmentally speaking, that's a huge issue. And I think there's a lot of big factors for that, such as portion sizes and things like that. But you don't really think of it until you see the numbers. Once I saw the numbers that you had sent me from that study, I was like, wow, the numbers are astronomical. But it is a huge issue.
Yeah, I forget where or who said this, but it was in a debate with organic food and GMOs, and the person who supported GMOs said that we need GMOs to feed the world, and the person who didn't support GMOs said that we have enough food, it's just how it's distributed and eaten. So these facts seem to support that. There's too much food waste.
Yeah, I agree.
And it seems to be, without getting into economic theory, seems to be about capitalistic ideals. So the idea that a banana can have a single black spot or an apple can have a tiny divot, that is a very perfectionist capitalist ideal. We want to buy phones with scratches on it, but it's completely different with food in that bananas with some black spots are perfectly fine. Apples with divots are just as tasty as regular apples. So if we can divorce this idea of capitalistic ideals for goods from food, then it might be able to help some stuff. And also if we implemented more composting programs, I think that would definitely help.
Yeah, so the reason for what you said, the black spots and the divots and things like that, so the USDA does what's called quality standards of food. So they do this, it's voluntary for meats, but they also do it for fruits and vegetables. And it's judged by quality, not wholesomeness. So they're not judging, when it's being sold, it's not being judged on, is it edible? Because almost all of it is. If it's not edible, it's not even going to go to inspection for the most part. It won't even pass that part. But it is judged on a quality perspective. So, this banana's got a bunch of black spots. Well, it jumps down a couple grades. It's only going to be able to go and select products. People aren't going to buy it as much. So I can understand from a company perspective, okay, if we have the most perfect fruit possible, we can sell it. It's more appealing. People are going to buy it. But I do agree, because this contributes to so much food waste. If they did implement, like you said, more composting programs, boom, you can take all those things that you weren't going to sell anyways, and you can put them back into the soil and enrich your own crops. So I do agree, and I just want to give some background of what actually causes that, is that their quality standards done for the consumer. And
right.
Again, you could eat a banana that's really black and brown. That's not really going to be an issue as long as there's no mold or it wasn't spoiled in any way. It's just a natural process that occurs.
Right, and talking about the USDA is a good segue into our next topic, which is actually meat and dairy industries. And so I just want to start with another fact like before. So according to sourcewatch.org, the food industry gave Congress over $41 million in campaign contributions in a recent 10-year period, with over a third going to the Senate and House Agricultural Committee members. During the same period, meat and poultry industries contributed over $9 million. The National Restaurant Association contributed over $3.1 million. The NCBA contributed over $1.4 million. And McDonald's contributed almost $1.7 million. So this out of the gate, this is a common thing with corruption. We can see that money needs to get out of politics, period, full stop. The defendant is paying the jury here, but that's not the point. The point is the massive amount of influence by meat and dairy industries on Congress and the government in general. So what are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, just from hearing those numbers and seeing where they're coming from, that right there, there's definitely a significant bias. If they're paying those huge amounts of money, you can't say that's not swaying things in their favor. And so that right there, just based off that data, that right there shows me that shouldn't be happening. That's a bit much. You're definitely paying something to get a little bit of a leverage there, and I can't say that's something I agree with, and it definitely doesn't help the credibility of their industry.
Right. And isn't the food pyramid, wasn't that helped created by meat and dairy industries?
Mm-hmm. They definitely had a significant say in that.
Right.
And just as a heads up, that is an outdated model now technically. We now use the My Plate, which is, I think, significantly more open to variation in people's diets. They do still have like the meat and dairy part, but the dairy part, for example, now includes non-dairy substitutes, so like almond milk, soy milk, things like that, which I think is a good shift. Meats, it's a little more so, but I think it's still pretty heavily swayed, just in my personal opinion, by meat industry. But I think the dairy one has made significant jumps in including other alternatives for people who don't drink dairy or eat dairy.
Right. So another thing about meat and dairy industries, according to a UN report, livestock generates 18% of greenhouse gas emissions, uses 30% of Earth's land surface and is a major source of deforestation. And so this is clearly a problem. And so maybe a way to help solve it is a veganism and society's progression of eating less meat. And just a quick plug before we get into this topic, we actually made a video about this. I think it was, is it healthy to go vegan or something like that? And you can find it on our channel. It's actually a video by Brandon Schaefer, our own dietitian, who is here with us today. And I recommend you check it out. But if you haven't, then we'll just talk a bit about veganism and how we're eating less meat as a society today. So what are your thoughts on that?
So veganism in its other forms like vegetarianism and things like that are definitely on the rise. I've seen so many more, and I know that's a huge trend that people were trying to push this year, especially this year. It's the year of veganism and things like that, and it's really rising, which is awesome to see because there are a lot of benefits to it. And it just, the biggest thing is making sure you're on top of it and you're working with someone that's knowledgeable at nutrition. So people that are going vegan or vegetarian, the biggest problem is, oh, I saw this diet on the internet. Someone was saying they went vegan. It was awesome. Or this nutritionist told me this. You're doing yourself a huge disservice there. Those people that are going through scientifically sound resources or talking through with registered dietitians are going to be able to make sure they're getting all the nutrients they need while also addressing the main point of veganism and vegetarianism, which is eating less meat, helping the environment, and typically more morally sound principles as well.
So if someone wanted to go vegan or vegetarian, was unsure of the most healthy route, they should contact their local dietitian? Is that what you're suggesting? Registered dietitian?
I would highly recommend that. And it's as simple as a simple Google search. Type in registered dietitians near me. And you can use Google Maps. You can use other things. There's lots of dietitians that do private practice, meaning you could schedule counseling sessions with them, and they could help you work through that. Just get you on your first couple steps and give you an outline of what you should be looking at.
Right. And we'll go over some stuff about that now. So it's perfectly healthy to eat vegan if it's done right. It's obviously easy to do it wrong, but eating vegan right will be far healthier than not being health conscious at all. I saw a video the other day of a speaker who talked about how all protein comes from plants. We talk about protein coming from meat, but that protein came from plants first. And so if you eliminate, in a way, the middleman, then you can get that protein just the same. And so what do you have to say to people who say that going vegan isn't healthy?
So when people say going vegan isn't healthy, a lot of people that do go vegan, like I've seen this a few times myself, is that someone will come in and say, oh, I was a vegan, but now I'm back on track and I'm eating meat again, or I just couldn't do it. It is hard to do. I'm not going to deny that. I personally don't do it myself, although I do practice not eating some meats and some things, but it is a difficult decision to do because it's everywhere. There's meat in tons of products. You say I go vegan, there's dairy in tons of products. Animal products are very commonly used in a lot of different foods. So it is difficult to do, and I understand that. And a lot of people get vitamins and minerals and proteins through their meat, through their dairy, through things like that, eggs, this such like that. And it can be difficult if you don't have the proper knowledge to give you the proper alternatives. So a lot of people are going vegan, but they're eating Oreos and they're doing all these other things. So they're not getting the nutrients they need, and it's not going to be healthy for them. And that is a very common problem. And I think that's where a lot of people get their misconception, is that when people say they're going vegan off something they saw on the internet, or they talk to some nutritionist at a store who wanted to sell them supplements, yeah, you're not getting the things you need. You're kind of ruining the whole point of it. You are trying to make less of an environmental impact, but you're hurting your own health. And I don't think that would be worth it at that point. So I do highly recommend, contacting a registered dietitian, because it makes a huge difference. It'll put you on your feet. It'll give you the resources you need to succeed, while also helping the environment significantly. But I do think it's completely healthy if you do it right. You just have to make sure that you're getting your vitamins and minerals. You have to make sure you're getting complete sources of protein, which with plant proteins can be tricky because a lot of them don't have the same amounts or types of protein that meat does. But if you're getting a variety of plant proteins, you're going to be totally okay.
Right, and if you eat healthy, then if you eat completely healthy, then there should be no stigma of, or no idea of sacrificing your health for the environment. You can help your health and the environment if you eat vegan in the correct way.
I agree.
And so veganism is one trend we see on the internet. Another trend is organic food. So I'd like to talk about that for a bit. Talk about the state of organic food, and for clarification, we're using the definition of organic food, meaning food that's made without pesticides or GMOs. There's definitely different definitions. I've personally used that definition mostly, but that's just the one we're using. So the literature seems a bit mixed on whether organic food is good and all GMOs are bad in terms of nutrition. However, the waters are ridiculously muddy on this due to the fact that big agriculture, specifically Monsanto, really tries to hide everything from the public. So if Monsanto opened research to the public and didn't fund most of the studies that say GMOs are perfectly healthy, this would be a far more intellectually honest conversation. And if I went to ScienceDaily.com and searched organic food, and 4 of the top results had organic food in a negative light and 3 in a positive light. More research is definitely needed to make sure this isn't just another essential oil scam. But I don't want to completely dismiss it, since I personally think that organic food is far better than inorganic food. That's just my personal, non-scientific perspective. However, the scientists and the dietitians need to figure this out. We need to listen to them. And so one we can listen to now is you. So how do you feel about organic food from a dietitian perspective?
So I've actually, one of my early college research experiments or projects that I did was involving organic food versus GMOs or conventionally grown foods. And I kind of came to a similar conclusion where it is very mixed. Organic food definitely has its benefits in terms of like fruits, meats, and vegetables because those ones tend to have the most pesticides and things of the sort on them. But it really comes down to the person's health and that community's health. If we were in a perfect world, organic food is significantly better for not only the environment, but for the consumer as well. And the biggest problem with this is that it's so influenced by the person and the community. So let's say the person and community just aren't eating many fruits or vegetables to begin with. And let's say that they want to switch over to only eating organic. Well, organic food typically is more expensive. And if you're going to be switching over to that, but you're not eating well already, you're not really doing yourself much of a service there because you're taking out food that you should be eating. So I think what you should start with when you're considering, switching over to all organic is that you should be eating an adequate amount of fruits and vegetables for your age group yourself already. Once you can do that and then you can afford to go organic, by all means go for it. But I think the biggest problem I see is people are so caught up on it has to be organic, I won't eat if it's not. Which isn't terrible, except for the fact that they're usually not already eating, the foods that they should be eating. So that's a big problem I see with organics just in itself. What you had said about Monsanto and the lack of publicity for the research, that is something that I've seen as well, and I definitely agree with that. Research should be made as publicly owned as possible. Because this is the knowledge that you're basing standards for the country, for the country's nutrition, for their agricultural programs, things like that on. That should be made public. It shouldn't be, boxed away privately for only a couple people to know. I don't agree with that at all, personally. The more public you can make research and your findings, the more the public can be aware of things and make educated and sound decisions for themselves. But I do think that organic is superior to GMO foods, but I do also see the benefits of GMOs. I do see that the argument that it allows us to produce enough food to feed, let's say, the whole world, But again, then you think about the food waste perspective. We are wasting a huge amount of food. Let's say we stop wasting that food. We don't necessarily need GMOs as much anymore. So again, tying it back, it is a mixed bag, but there are pros and cons to both. And I do agree with we need to make the research more publicly available.
Right. Two trends I'm seeing with this discussion is with the meat and dairy industries and GMOs is that research needs to be very publicly available and not hidden at all. And then also another trend I'm seeing is that with veganism and organic food, you should not ever feel like you're sacrificing health for the environment. If you do, then you're doing this wrong. So if you feel like unhealthy or unwell when you're eating vegan food and being a vegan, that's not the right way to go. You should definitely contact a dietitian and figure out the right way to do, because there's plenty of ways to be healthy and environmentally conscious with GMOs, with the organic food, with veganism. You should never have to sacrifice one for the other.
I agree.
And any other topics you want to discuss?
So tying this all together and kind of explaining how I, as a dietitian, or how a dietitian would want to solve environmental issues, I just kind of want to do a brief review and kind of tie it together. So when we're talking about food waste, the biggest way that, as a dietitian, I would address this is discussing portion size with my clients. And, we discuss this a lot with diabetic patients or renal disease patients, because portion size is super important for these groups of people. But for just, the average Joe or the average Susan, they may not think portion size applies to them. But not only in a health perspective is it super important to, A, keep you at a reasonable weight to keep, your health up, but you're wasting less foods. And like you had said, the kind of capitalistic idea of goods, the more is better. Buying in bulk. It is that can be great for some people. If you live in a large family or you eat a lot of a certain food and you're going to need it all week, that can be, a positive thing. But you do also see a lot of people who buy huge bulk food and then end up throwing out 40 to 60% of it every week, and that's a huge food waste. That means that all those resources that went into it to produce it are just being thrown out. So teaching portion size and becoming more aware of what you actually use and or need is huge to eliminate food waste. For the meat and dairy industry that we had talked about, donating or giving away that much money to Congress or representatives so that your industry can be favored is probably not the most credible thing to be doing. And I do agree that they use a huge amount of resources compared to other ones. For example, when we were having one of the hurricanes near Florida, I actually had read a news article where all the waste from all those animals, the hundreds of thousands of animals that they use, has to go somewhere. And so they're holding all that waste in a silo. And when that hurricane came in, it destroyed the silo and it spilled everywhere. So you have to imagine that you have to keep in mind there's the waste management side of it. So not only the resources that it takes to grow those animals and then to harvest them for the meat, you have to keep in mind, where are they putting that waste? Is that waste in environments that it could easily be destroyed? Like, for example, a flood came in and destroyed the silo, and that waste went everywhere. That's a huge environmental crisis right there for that area. And they do emit a lot of emissions. They use a lot. Does that make them necessarily horrible for your health? No, they do have a place for your health, but one thing that I encourage people to do is understand where the source of that food is. So when you're eating meats, it is better to eat organic meats. They're using less resources, less chemicals, things like that, and they're done in usually more sustainable practices. And one thing I practiced a while back was when I was eating meat, I only ate meat if it was produced organically or sustainably, as well as ethically, for my own reasons. Talking about veganism and eating less meat, one thing people do is they jump into it. They just completely jump in it, which isn't bad at all. That's very brave to do, and that can have a lot of positive results, again, if you're doing it the right way. I see a lot of people who go for internet tips or nutritionists online who have a random certificate from who knows where, and you do see a lot of problems because a lot of people aren't getting the nutrients they need. If you're doing it in a smart way, talking to a registered dietitian or talking to your doctor and making sure that you're meeting all your needs, you're doing a great job right there. But let's say, and one thing I want to encourage is, let's say that you like the idea of veganism or vegetarianism, but you're not ready to completely jump in. Well, you don't necessarily need to abide by all the rigid standards if it doesn't fit you. For example, I really do like the practices that vegans use and vegetarians use, but for me it just doesn't fit. So for example, I cut out all red meat, things like that, the heavier meats that use more environmental resources, and the only thing I eat now is organic chicken when I do eat meat. So that right there is a step that you can do, for example, that right there I'm still getting the same proteins, I'm getting all those vitamins and minerals. I'm not completely giving it up, but it fits more for my lifestyle and what I'm doing. Things like meatless Mondays or going meatless on the weekdays and then allowing yourself to eat meat on the weekends are also great because you're reducing your average meat consumption. So doing things like this are going to keep you more conscious of your decisions and allow you to make better choices. Now, when we're talking about organic food, it's very mixed, and I do agree that research should be made more publicly available. I think that's ridiculous that it's blocked away by companies who are using it because this affects everyone. You know, if you're being affected by a decision, you want to know what that decision is and how it impacts you. It is mixed, and I do think people need to make sure that they're getting their proper nutrients, their proper food groups, portion sizes, things like that. And once you have that down, I see no problem with jumping organic and eating an organic diet because you are taking away some of those pesticides, and it is beneficial for your health and also the environment. But make sure that, like you had said, you're not doing it at the detriment to your own health.
Right. Being more environmental conscious should never come at the detriment of your health. It never needs to in the first place.
Mm-hmm.
All right. That was a fascinating discussion. There's a lot of ties between food and the environment, as we saw today. More ties than I think many of us realize, because it is so critical to our lives, and every being on this planet needs food. Every person needs to eat. And so even just taking the environment aside for a moment, solving these issues, solving food waste, the money lost from it, the health effects of veganism and going organic, solving all these issues will be tremendously beneficial to the human race as a whole. So this is a very important conversation to be having.
I agree.
So thank you, Brandon Schaefer, for coming to the podcast. Brandon Schaefer, registered dietitian. And yeah, thank you.
Yeah, thank you for having me. It was a fun time. I always enjoy it.